3 to 4 at tops 5% or more of Venezuela's oil was going to China, something like 25 to 30% from Iran to China. Russia with all its ghost ships, is all mixed up in that. So again, if you do buy the theory that we are very close to China, if China saw any weakness from the United States right now, Xi has promised he's going to take Taiwan by force, or as they would prefer, by the rest of the world just saying it's yours, right? And as we've talked about, he wants the PLA to be ready operationally by 2027. So that's that breakneck race we're talking about.
Sam Cooper, my brother, we are back in action. How you doing, man?
It's good to be back, man.
It's been a busy couple of weeks for you. I been staying tuned, eyes peeled to the bureau. It's been a wild couple of weeks, man. The world is. Who would have thought 2026 would start out this way?
I mean, people that would have heard many of our talks would have got the theory that the world is getting more chaotic and dangerous. And yeah, action. It seems like it's going to be a year of a lot of big events. That's the way it's feeling.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it, Sam. I want to start with Venezuela. Everybody knows Maduro was extracted and, let's say, forcefully extradited to the United States. What's difficult about all this, Sam, is whenever something like this happens, the internet just floods with narratives. You have, political ideologies informing one side and the other. But, you're a guy who's on the inside. You have a lot of sources in, the U.S. administration, inside of different agencies. What were the grounds for Maduro's removal from Venezuela, as far as you understand it?
Yeah, I've been writing about, there's an indictment that goes back to 2020 that talks about how Maduro and senior generals, former generals, military intelligence have been essentially leveraging Venezuela as a narco state. So, yeah. And being directly involved in drug dealing. This is not just corruption, but the allegations from the US government under the Trump administration, which were carried forward, and the reward for Maduro's capture was raised by the Biden administration. So this is a US justice. And at the end of the day, of course, there's a military component, which we can get into. But the allegations are he was giving the usage of Venezuelan planes, Venezuela's state oil company, his own presidential hangar. He and his wife, who's in charge, she's a lawyer, she's in charge of, the whole justice system, had their own drug dealing gang and were intentionally, the allegations are, targeting the United States with drug shipments as part of not only a profiteering exercise, but as a kind of hybrid war, working with other bad people to destabilize the United States. So to expand it a little further, the updated superseding indictment was unsealed hours after they reveal that special forces extracted Maduro in a highly, highly successful operation, which, my comment is it's much like the B-2 strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities. It's just like incredible what the US government can do. But the new indictment says that Maduro, his son, various intelligence bosses from the military were running thousands and thousands of tons of cocaine up into North America. We've talked before about how Ryan Wedding and his network with the Sinaloa cartel, and I say Hezbollah money launderers, were running drugs through Margarita Island, which is part of Venezuela. So this indictment just packs that all together. And that's, I know that people come to me for some credibility and authority now, and I'm saying the US government can easily prove the allegations against Maduro because they have already convicted people that are part of his conspiracy, have been convicted in New York and admitted to being part of this drug enterprise. So as we see, this case move through courts, I think you will see, former generals that have been convicted and taken some sort of plea dealings will be up on the stand, or will have notarized evidence saying, yeah, I was part of this deal. Maduro was there. His son was there. You'll have DEA tape recordings of, confidential DEA sources or officials that infiltrated the network talking on tape recordings of basically the bribes going across, the Western Hemisphere and these drug deals. So it's a slam dunk case.
So was Maduro and his gang operating independently, or were they operating in tandem with other groups? I mean, obviously they were, but do we know who those other groups were, and do we know what the connection was?
Yeah, the new superseding indictment unsealed this past week says that Maduro's enterprise was working with TDA, Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan designated now narco terror group, which is, deeply embedded across the United States, also in Canada. And their leader, I'll just give you an example. The indictment says provided, boating and transportation facilities for Maduro's drug dealing enterprise out of Venezuela. The court filings say the Sinaloa cartel is mixed up in the dealings with Maduro's gang, and which is called, there's some controversy around this, the cartel of the Suns, meaning members of Maduro's cartel are generals that have a sun badge on their arm. Some people, give more or less credence to that, but there's no doubt that TDA, Sinaloa cartel, FARC, ELN, these are narco terror drug trafficking groups in Colombia, which are a big part of the enterprise. And just to tie it all off, a piece of the indictment that brings it all together says that two relatives of Maduro are caught on tape recordings with DEA officers or sources talking about how they're moving drugs through Margarita Island, how Maduro's son, whose nickname is the Prince, would fly into Margarita Island on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, where the army had set up, basically parties for the Venezuelan government elite. Maduro's son would fly in on the state oil company plane, which would be used for, to package up drugs on Margarita Island and then to deal them off to North America. And another piece of that, there's a guy that comes into this, I believe his name is, it's escaping me. It's a Middle Eastern name, but he's a big part, allegedly, of the Maduro enterprise. This is named in the indictment. And while it's not named in the indictment, further U.S. government, U.S. Treasury sanctions reporting tie this guy and another, Middle Eastern figure in the Venezuela regime to Hezbollah. So we've probably talked before how there's all kinds of U.S. government reporting and intelligence that says that the Iranian regime and Hezbollah are working with Venezuelan drug dealers, including Maduro, on Margarita Island.
Yeah, so I kind of want to draw a bit of a map here, because something interesting happened early in Trump's second term. That was early in 2025. They locked down the Panama Canal, which China had largely taken over. Now, Venezuela, interestingly enough, has some very deep connections to China. And Sam, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what it looks like to me in Latin America right now, there's another component to this as well, that China's Belt and Road Initiative took over or picked up where the United States CIA sponsored and military coups in South America left off. So when the U.S. and the IMF and the World Bank kind of picked up and moved on from Latin America, the China's Belt and Road Initiative moved in. So what it looks like to me as an observer, as a reader of your reporting, and just a guy who understands a little bit about the world despite my very obvious mental deficiencies, it looks to me like Trump and the Americans are in the process of purging China out of Latin America. Would have you seen the same thing?
That is absolutely happening. They're purging China, and they're purging Cuban intelligence, which is another big story of how embedded throughout the Western Hemisphere Cuban intelligence is. That includes, a lot of well-connected people in the United States in various industries. We've talked before about how, these Marxist groups have been very embedded in North America, into our culture wars in ways that are really not well understood.
Yeah.
But Cuban intelligence is very much involved in that. And so, yeah, the Trump administration, from Marco Rubio saying, we're going to take back Panama, either the person we've talked about Hutchison Whampoa, this, we never named the Hong Kong tycoon because we don't need to, but he's very much a part of, the narrative in my book, Willful Blindness, and how this guy from Hong Kong and his friends set up very deeply in Vancouver's real estate and port, and are set up very well on ports and on the west coast of Mexico. They own Hutchison Whampoa, essentially have set up on both ends of the choke points of the canal. And so Marco Rubio is saying, we're going to take that back from China and its proxies, or else. That's what's going on there. What you point to, the purge of Chinese port infiltration, which, as you and I have talked about, I put Vancouver Chinese port infiltration in the same category, if not the same degree, as Chinese Mexican port infiltration, Chinese infiltration of Venezuela and its infrastructure, Panama, Belize, Peru, Nicaragua. We can go on and on. So there's a little, I'll end my answer to you with this anecdote. When I was digging into the Trump administration's accusations against Canada as a vector for fentanyl in the past year, and there was all this denial reporting from the CBC and Globe and Mail, etc., I talked to a senior American official. This time I couldn't name them, but I did a number of long read interview stories on the Bureau. And the person told me, look, you'd have to be crazy to think that J.D. Vance would be flying up to Greenland. Marco Rubio would be talking about taking back Panama or else. President Trump would be saying, thank you for your attention to this matter, Canada. Tariffs, stop the fentanyl or else. This was a year ago. I was hearing that this is real because the U.S. government is so concerned about war with China that its doctrine is controlling its backyard, so that if they have to go kinetic with China, they know they're secure in the Western Hemisphere. So that's what's going on now. And so I had this insight from a senior level at the U.S. government that this kind of wild action we're seeing at the start of 2026 would unroll. Did I know that special forces with apparent sonic weapons, whether we know that's true or not, with 20 people would be able to overcome, from dozens to hundreds of, Venezuelan and Cuban guards? I didn't know anything to that level, but I knew that major events would start unfolding, over the past year, and here we are.
There's this romantic, easily digestible narrative that gets pushed out in legacy media whenever something like this happens, right? That America has swooped in to bring freedom and democracy to Venezuela, and the Panama Canal will always belong to the United States, and they're just taking back what belongs to them. Everything is always distilled down into these easily digestible, easy to understand narratives, but I think it does the actual story a disservice, because what you see unraveling from those narratives or stemming out from those narratives is all of this arguing on, small, minute, really unimportant details on social media. And Sam, this is what I've surmised by everything that I'm seeing happening. What we're experiencing or witnessing right now is a Cold War between two empires. You have China and the United States. The US being the old empire, the global hegemon for the last 50 years, and China racing toward the finish line to global dominance. And the United States, with a president who is just wild and crazy enough to do some of this stuff, they recognize that their window, their ability to move on this and cut the head off the snake is getting shorter and shorter and shorter as the days go by. And so now the US is racing to stop China from succeeding in their quest for global dominance. And that's what this is all about. This is about two empires engaged in a Cold War. Do you see it the same way?
Absolutely. We talked before. I pointed, our listeners to, there's a video clip, a literal video clip from, I believe, 2023 of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping meeting outside a Russian facility. And it's after a dinner or something. And Putin says, "We are seeing opportunities that we have not seen in 100 years. And Xi says, "I agree." So they both, Xi and Putin, believe that their empires should be global hegemons. Xi has a realistic chance. Putin, at this point, he's deluded. He's not going to get there, but he'll burn everything down to try to get there. So those two have agreed, along with Iran and North Korea, that now is the time to push to overcome what was called the Western rules-based order that came out of World War II and, Ronald Reagan winning the Cold War. And so you're right. Everyone, the best analysis I've seen is that the West has squandered the sort of decades that followed Ronald Reagan's, drive and essential victory over the Soviet Empire. And the peace dividend, this was, everyone was getting fat, rich, and lazy in the West. This is where the whole globalism that, we talk about and that you often look into came from. That is, rich people in cities in the West pushing their governments to increase trade with these, states. People were arguing, this is the end of history. The West won. Now it's all about international trade. Everyone gets rich. But that wasn't what was happening. People like Xi were coldly biding their time, using that internationalism and global trade to steal Western technology. And here we are. So you're right. It's now the US government has, I believe, that their strategy is a renewal of the Monroe Doctrine. When and if war breaks out, around Taiwan, they want to have the West locked down. They want to have Greenland as a beachhead against, in my view, as we both probably agree, Canada has squandered any chance of being, a responsible state and holding up its end of the northern hemisphere, the Western hemisphere. And so this is why Trump and JD Vance are trying to buy Greenland, right? It's a very, very more than enough good analysts have said we're in like 1939 or 1938. If this is going to be the next major war.
We're going to get to Greenland in a minute because that's another important piece to this puzzle. What I'm trying to do is bring this all together for our listeners so that they can understand what they're seeing. I wrote a little piece about it on X the other day, but I really want to talk to you because you're the expert. And the thing that's really been disappointing to me is I'm seeing a lot of journalists that I highly respect, people like Glenn Greenwald, getting this wrong, completely misunderstanding what's happening. This isn't just regime change for the sake of resources, right? Like this is, you close down the Panama Canal to China and Russia, you shut down Venezuela, you are cutting off some serious resources that China would require in order to mobilize against Taiwan, Japan, potentially the US in the future, right?
Exactly. 3 to 4 at tops, 5% or more of Venezuela's oil was going to China. Something like 25 to 30% from Iran to China. Russia with all its ghost ships, is all mixed up in that. So again, if you do buy the theory that we are very close to China, if China saw any weakness from the United States right now, Xi has promised he's going to take Taiwan by force, or as they would prefer, by the rest of the world just saying it's yours, right? And as we've talked about, he wants the PLA to be ready operationally by 2027. So that's that breakneck race we're talking about. Yeah. The US government, there's a guy, people can look him up, Elbridge Colby, I believe is his name. His dad was a former, I believe, high-level CIA or another security agency. And he is the author of this doctrine of secure your backyard, so the Western Hemisphere, pull your assets out of Ukraine. The US government, in his view, only has so many warheads and munitions, and they need to be ready for China. So that's what's going on right now.
Yeah, and you can see how they're fortifying, right? You have Javier Milei now in Argentina, who's a friend of the Trump administration. You have Nayib Bukele in, oh my God, why am I blanking on this? El Salvador, Guatemala. Yeah. El Salvador, another friend of the Trump administration. Maduro's gone. I was listening to your conversation with Brian Lilly as I was speeding up the highway to get here, and it looks like Mikado is not cooperating with the United States. So who knows who's going to end up in that position. But see, this is the point that I'm trying to make here, is that this is an empire game that was classically purposely obfuscated by the American administrations for good reason, because it's dirty and most people won't like it. And even myself, I wrote extensively on this for a number of years. I was vehemently against regime change in foreign nations for this empire game that the United States is playing. But this time it's different.
Until you and I lived at the forefront of a Chinese hybrid warfare operation in Vancouver and saw the alternative.
That's right. See, this time it's different, because although the American empire is messy and dirty and bloody at times, the alternative, living underneath a Chinese global hegemon, is far worse. And that's what I wrote on X yesterday, was that, in a world controlled by America, we have an enemy to fight, and Glenn Greenwald is free to fight it. In a world ruled by China, Glenn Greenwald doesn't exist.
And that's disappeared.
That's
China. Yeah, he's disappeared.
That's the difference. So we find ourselves in this weird place where this empire game that the United States has been playing for 50, 60 years, now, previously, I was against it. I was vehemently outspoken about what the United States and its intelligence agencies were doing around the world. But now I see that America has to win. They have to win. And that they're getting dirty, and it's the same old America game. This is the same old brute force, right? Blunt force trauma. Keep your head spinning while they take everything that they need. But again, it is preferable to the alternative. You do not want a world run by China.
Yeah, and I think another piece of the Western Hemisphere operations that are starting to unfold is China using that peace dividend that was squandered in the globalization era by the West, has secured critical minerals. Everything from, whatever runs our AI chips, to actual gunpowder or antimony or whatever, is put in like the low level munitions. And so the US government absolutely is putting a huge ton of pressure on Canada, Greenland, up and down South America to secure deals so that in a war, China will not be able to own and produce all the munitions. The United States will not have to go over to Europe or Asia and say, can we buy this from you? They'll have control of enough critical minerals across the Western Hemisphere. So again, I think that's part of the Greenland picture, part of the Venezuela picture, part of the Canada picture, probably. It's not just all about counter drugs or military preparation or oil. Critical minerals are a big piece of it. And the fact that China essentially controls that supply chain.
Well, it just seems to me like the Trump administration were waiting to pounce on Venezuela, and the drug thing is 100% a pretext. I personally don't believe they care I mean, they do, obviously, and they've made it a point that they do care about the flow of fentanyl through the United States, but I think China is at the core of it and trying to root them out of our continent. Right.
I agree. And we only have to look at John Molinar, head of the Congressional CCP Select Committee. He put out a post on X after that operation and said, essentially, China was behind all the ill dealings in Venezuela, and our Congressional Committee will work with our allies to continue to investigate and root out CCP influence in the Western Hemisphere. So that's the proof of your point right there. I do think drugs, is a pretty big part of it, that vector. But the denial of oil and the CCP behind it all, using Venezuela and other proxy states, is the major factor. Yeah.
So now let's move over to Iran, because this is piece number 2. And what we have in Iran is a citizen uprising against an oppressive Islamic fundamentalist regime. One that, once again, no question in my mind, is U.S. led. Definitely an intelligence operation. However, let's talk about Iran. Sam, what is happening there to the best of your understanding, and what is the connection to China?
Yeah, I'll start with, how it developed over the past 14 days. I went to my colleague, an amazing Iranian Canadian journalist, who exposed the fact that Iran has hundreds of high-level assets in Canada, which is a whole other weakness and story. I had worked with her, a little bit, with my expertise, and she did amazing work on that. And she has deep connections, of course, to Iran, and reports how, the regime's failing on economics in conjunction, connection with just their absolutely brutal repression. Most elements of society in Iran have had enough of it, and have had all they can take. And so, about 2 weeks ago, they started to have these revolts in sort of merchant communities, because they can't make money when the exchange rate is flying around, or, deflation is going off the charts. And so these from the Iranian perspective, very much citizen led. They take a different view than you, that this is very much citizen led. They start to, snowball, and these people take to the streets. On Friday, when I did my report, we both agreed with my colleague, Nagar, that it was a tipping point. It was going to go one way or the other. And she said that this weekend, it looks like this will tip from revolt into revolution. And that's what happened. So to your point, how involved are the CIA and Mossad? I think, they're there. They're trying to, of course, they're trying to stay as covert as possible.
Yeah.
I don't think they're leading any of the charges at all to this point. But, depending on how fast you break this podcast and get it online, it's Monday night, and it looks like President Trump is about to, I would say, approve kinetic and surgical strikes of some other great U.S. war technology that will amaze people, potentially even at the Ayatollah himself. So this is a real revolution. And at the end of the day, you're right. If Iran falls, we don't know what kind of chaos or what form of government could take place. We can be sure that it's not going to be U.S. boots on the ground, because that ain't flying anymore. But Iran being, along with Russia, a key ally in that, what we talked about, as the authoritarians they see an opportunity they haven't seen in 100 years to upset the US Western led order, and Iran absolutely key to that. So they fall. That's another huge blow to Xi Jinping's plan to take Taiwan, and and then Japan, and then the dominoes. So that you're exactly right. Iran is a major piece of that puzzle.
So I don't know the number offhand, but I believe that Iran is responsible for roughly 10 to 15% of China's oil.
Even
That
higher, I think.
Yes, it is an absurd amount.
Yeah.
So once again, look, I see in this situation, I'm in a weird place, right? Because is it right for the United States, even if, let's say that this is completely a citizen-led revolution, dark money and intelligence are not involved whatsoever, the United States still is very vocally supportive of this uprising, right? I mean, they're getting their planes ready in Qatar right now for airstrikes, right? Like they are about, whether or not they're involved in this, they are about to assist in a revolution. And see, previously, again, going back in time, I would have been against this because I am against regime change wars. I know what revolution means. I know the power vacuum that's created. It never ends well. And if you want modern day proof of that, just look at Syria, right? I mean, you have a Christian genocide that's happening there right now that has gone largely unreported because nobody cares. But in this circumstance, you have a group of people, not a group, a population that has been oppressed for almost 50 years, that are on the verge of achieving freedom. The same goes for Venezuela. I mean, Hugo Chavez was more of a cartoon character than he was more of a Mussolini than a Hitler. For the people who understand history, he was more of a cartoon character than an evil dictator, but he was still oppressive. So you have these people who have lived under these oppressive regimes for decades that are about to achieve freedom. And it's hard not to be in support of that, even though you know that what's happening is kind of, is it legal? Maybe, maybe not. But again, the overarching theme here also is that the American empire is finally striking against this evil, dark communist empire that has spent the last, almost 80 years slowly encroaching itself on the world. Now you look at Canada, Australia, the EU, you look at digital IDs, censorship laws. This is literally the Chinese system being grafted onto different parts of the world. You can literally see which Western nations are in bed with China because they are all introducing the same laws at the same time.
Well, I mean, you know more than me, and you've got stronger thoughts than I do.
Sorry, Sam.
No, I mean,
rabbit hole alert.
No, on that point, I start to think it's fair to say that if Keir Starmer is talking about banning X, and he seems to be getting support from the Australian, not leftist, but left-leaning leader, and maybe or maybe not from Carney. Yeah, these are all the type of people that are leaning, that have a pretty strong influence from socialists, maybe Marxists within their own caucuses. And you and I think now are very much on the same page that the Chinese Communist Party has been a big part of that. And yeah, the people that are weak on China are the ones that are leaning into these censorship kind of movements. So yeah, I do agree. And when I look at the events of the US government now they've taken the gloves off, right? The knuckles are out. They're starting to flex their muscles. People are getting worried and saying they could be a danger. I don't know. That's not my belief, but I understand why people are starting to feel that way, right? But if Xi Jinping did not publicly pledge over and over again that he will be ready to take Taiwan by 2027, I don't think any of this from the United States happens. We're still living in, the kumbaya, rules-based international order, the peace dividend, and the globalization era, unless Xi and Putin say, no, we're not satisfied with that. We want to run the show. That's my own belief.
Well, see, and look, I'm not saying that Xi Jinping is sitting in the bat cave and he picks up the bat phone and he calls Keir Starmer and he's like, shut down X. And then he calls Carney and he's like, you do it too. Right? Like, that's not how this works. What I believe is that they've gained a disproportionate amount of influence in globalist NGOs like the United Nations, like the World Health Organization, like the famed World Economic Forum. And it's through these bodies and institutions that this stuff is coming down the pike. Okay. And it just so happens that China has an obscene amount of influence within these institutions, right?
Yeah, and it seems I'm getting more and more insight that Cuba operationally is a big part of that in the Western Hemisphere in terms of these leftist groups and NGOs and the people that are out for a different riot cause on a different weekend, but it's a push button operation. And Cuba, with China being the bigger brother, I think is very much involved in that.
And Sam, at a later date, I want to dive into this Cuba thing with you because that is super fascinating. And I read that op-ed on the Bureau earlier this week, and it's mind blowing. And I'm going to drag you back into the darkness for that one because I think that one. But okay, Code Pink, Tides Foundation. You have all of these NGOs, these foundations, quote unquote, that are very much connected to China. That it just came out today that the No Kings protests that we saw all across Canada and the United States were funded to the tune of $300 million. And who was involved in the funding? The Rockefeller Institute, George Soros and his Open Society Foundation, Warren Buffett. It's the same group over and over and over again.
Jason, I'll jump on that because I know when people, even myself 5 years ago, when I heard people say George Soros, this or that, I'd start to roll my eyes.
Me too.
Look, I'm going to tell people, listeners, I've been in on private, they call them Chatham House Rules talks, where people from the U.S. intelligence community will invite me because of my book or whatever. I've broken some ground on the China file. And so I can be a witness to their private conversations and their view of subversive groups in the United States. And George Soros's name comes up again and again. And these are not, I think probably if I had to guess, some of them are more Republican, but there's absolutely I can see in the crowd, there's progressive, there's Democrats. Some people say, sorry, I'm going to have to opt out. I worked for a Soros. I'm leaving the chat group. These are current conversations. So again, if the Trump administration does a racketeering case and names George Soros, people are going to be like, oh, Trump, it's all fake. But no, this is the U.S. intelligence community there's enough people in there that point to those same people. That's all I wanted to share because like I said, 5 years ago, I'd hear the name Soros and I think this is a conspiracy theory, but there's people that carry badges that are investigating this and believe this.
Well, but that's the thing. I felt the same way. Like, I know people are just coming to get to know me over the last couple of years after I fell off the cliff post-COVID, but I was the same way for the longest time. I was like, George, like, get the fuck out of here. I don't want to hear about this. Like, let's stick to reality, right? Yeah. But what happens is, Sam, is that you follow George Soros's Open Society Foundation. You follow groups like Code Pink. You follow the Rockefeller Foundation. And then the Tides Foundation. And then you turn over a rock and it's China. I feel like we're in this like perpetual episode of Scooby-Doo where we pull back the mask and there they are, right?
China and their little brother Cuba. Yeah. In every name you mentioned there, those two will be there. Yeah.
So, Sam, I know you got to run really soon here, and I don't want to drag this on forever. It's a quick episode tonight, but another important factor in the Iran on the brink of revolution, what looks like have been a revolution by the time this airs, is the Suez Canal. That's another important aspect to this, another trade route, right? So you see how these pieces are moving, right? Like the American empire is cutting off resources to China, locking down trade routes. They're shutting the whole thing down. And that's what I want to get through to people here today. And the reason I was so desperate to talk to you is because this story is bigger than what is being or what is being represented on social media or in legacy media. What this is the Americans jumping on an opportunity with a wild card outside of the box president who doesn't care about flexing muscle and finally taking China out of the picture. That's what this is, at least as it appears to me.
That I agree. And, you know, there's people like this Greek minister, I forget his name, Yanis, whatever. I saw his post on X. You know the type of people. Glenn Greenwald probably has the same view. The narrative is the United States has overturned the rules-based international order and taken us to 1940. And I'm like, well, the first part is right. That order is turned over. We're back to 1940. But please, people, Exhibit A. People can look it up, put it in the show notes. The Xi Putin video, it's just beautiful. You can watch them. Putin is saying goodbye after a nice meal, and he says, we've seen an opportunity that we haven't seen in 100 years.
Yeah.
I don't need to complicate it further than that. They're the ones that are driving that, and the U.S. government with a leader that is crazy enough to really hit hard is responding to that. That's my belief.
Well, and the thing is too is okay, yeah, the United States is doing its blunt force trauma, the thing that it's done forever, but we've been subjected to, I mean, just look at Canada. You wrote a whole book on it. You keep updating the book because new shit happens all the time. And you keep creating new versions and revised versions of your book, which I heard from a bird, you might be working on another one, which I sincerely hope you are. But the point is that, yeah, the United States, let's say in their intelligence agencies, foment dissent in Iran, create a revolution and a citizen-led coup. Okay, maybe not such a good thing. TikTok. What are we going to say about that? Because we had Maoist style Marxism mainlined into our culture for the last 15 years. So what do we call that?
And not just from the CBC.
but you know what I'm saying, right? Actually, Sam, you brought up a really good point, because it came in through our legacy media institutions in a lot of circumstances. Like they infiltrated every corner of our culture to a point where we don't even know how to define what gender anymore. Like, we're so confused and backwards and upside down. You have people in the streets in Minneapolis arguing over whether or not illegal immigrants should be allowed to by the millions, not just like 3 people. We're talking 50 plus million people should be allowed to reside in your country. People, you don't even know who they are. Like, the point that I'm getting to is that we experienced a cultural revolution in Canada that is a mirror image of the cultural revolution that occurred under Chairman Mao. And nothing, there's no recourse. And if you ask me what the United States is doing in Latin America, in Iran, and soon to do in Greenland, and I believe will do in Canada right after, is justified, because we've been dealing with an out of control communist regime bent on global domination that has finally come to the end paces of the race, and the United States is jumping in action. That's the way I see it.
And we don't have time in this evening episode to get into Mark Carney's trip to Beijing, but I think you'll be feeling rewarded to know that, I mean, the things we have talked about probably 3 to 5 times about how the Power Corporation of Montreal and Jean Chrétien paved the way for, liberal prime ministers, mostly, but conservatives too, to sell out Canada to China. That story has just renewed and gone into hyperdrive. And none other than Michael Kovrig, has been very active on X, pointing to the same exact thing about, Jean Chrétien being over in Beijing a week before Carney arrives. Mr. Kovrig went as far to say, Jean Chrétien has many business and political ties. He's a frequent flyer to China, in and out of politics. It looks like he may be setting the framework for Mark Carney to come behind. Jean Chrétien has many ties to the Power Corporation. Canadians should watch very closely for any deals struck in Beijing and whether, human rights are trumped yet again for commercial interests. So we've talked about Power Corporation and how I have carefully said that they have a high level of influence over what is happening in Canada. And now it's right out in the open. Others, have hit the alarm button, and people can find that more widely reported now.
I want to hit 2 more checkpoints before we're out of here, Sam, and then I'll let you go. Greenland. Now, I was reading this morning, Germany, France, and other NATO nations are talking about mobilizing against the United States to protect Greenland, which, good fucking luck with that. The United States is NATO. And if you keep pushing your luck, if they pull out of NATO, the United States is the glue that holds NATO together. Literally the money that keeps them functional. Sam, in your view, why does the U.S. want NATO? Or, Greenland?
I think it's the very same thing as President Trump and Marco Rubio saying, we will not let the Panama Canal stay in China's hands.
Yeah.
And as my source that I talked about earlier in this conversation said, China has something like 15 very strong supercharged port access points in the Western Hemisphere. You don't have J.D. Vance going up to Greenland early in the administration unless the world is at a very, very dangerous point. So, yeah, the same thing as Panama. They're trying to control that you talked about Suez Canal, Panama Canal, same thing up in Greenland. There's choke points, which if Canada had developed as it should as a nation, we'd have very strong military outposts up there. We'd be a stronger partner that, could push back against the United States if we felt that they were going a bit far, because we have the military to have a say and be at the table, and we can take care of the North, but we can't, right? So Canadians that are all up in arms, I don't like President Trump or his administration threatening military operations against Greenland. And by the way, they won't do that. They won't have to. What I'm saying is it's about that, Arctic passage, which becomes more important, which becomes crucial in a war. It's about, to a large extent, I believe, critical minerals in Greenland. It's about what you pointed towards, denying that strategic passage and land, most importantly, to China and Russia, more than anything else. Strategy of denial. So what's going to happen? I mean, is Germany going to stand militarily against the U.S.? No. Is the U.S. going to go into Greenland militarily? No. A deal will be struck. And the way I like to put it is, politics is much like wrestling. There's kayfabe. There's like theater for the masses. And That's what's going on at the political level. Underneath, as some have noted, the U.S. government just approved a big arms sale, I believe, to Denmark. So it's like what happened in Europe. The U.S. has stopped saying, come on, Germany, you need to arm up again. And they said, okay, well, we're going to cut off funding a bit. Oh, we'll start it up again. You can have some more missiles. We'll cut it off. They're jolting the European states into military posture.
Yeah.
And so that, Europe, Europe hasn't done anything with Greenland. It hasn't, it's much like Canada. We haven't used the space that we're gifted with and built it up, in the way we should have security wise. And so the US government has seen that vacuum or that need and it's filling it.
Yes. Okay. So to summarize for people listening, you have Venezuela, Panama Canal, Venezuela being a major point of export for toxic drugs moving into the United States and Canada, also a supplier of oil, a critical resource for China. You have Iran, another supplier of oil, other resources to China, another strategic location for China because of the Suez Canal, another trade route. You have Greenland and the Arctic Passage that leads into. I have referenced this person a number of times on my podcast. I cannot say their name. I am desperately trying to get them to come on the show. They are an intelligence person in the United States. They listen to our conversations all the time. They told me that you are the most on the nose that they have come across. However, they say the one place where you're wrong is that it is infinitely worse than you know. So what this person said to me, they said two things that I'll never forget. They said, number one, if this war happens, it will be fought in the Canadian Arctic, unquestionably. And two, that when Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government allowed the PLA to train in the Canadian Arctic, that was the break point. That was the break point where the United States said, that's it, all bets are off, because they allowed the Chinese army, the Chinese military to train on the very terrain in which they will be fighting at some point in the future. And Sam, do you want to add to that? Do you want to say something there?
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't heard that from the American perspective, but I had heard from friends in the Canadian military that were tied to that story or how that information came out. The Canadian military knows China is the enemy. They know that their bosses have been allowing China to do that, or there were Navy situations where China was still seeking access. So yeah, the Canadian military knows the score, and it's a political thing. It's why, as you say, the Trudeau government allowed that to happen. And yeah, I could see that being the breaking point, one of many. But if that's the straw that broke the camel's back, it wouldn't surprise me.
So final checkpoint, Sam, before I let you get out of here and go to bed. With Venezuela now in American hands, Iran about to experience a revolution, China's friends are slowly starting to disappear off of the map. We have a prime minister here in Canada who has spoken openly about increasing trade with China, about supplying more oil and gas to China, which again, with Venezuela and Iran out of the picture, I would imagine that Canada will become more of a shoulder to lean on for China. Okay. We're watching the American empire swing around the world, slowly decapitating the Chinese at every spot. However, there is one more place on the map that just so happens to be north of this empire that is part of the same continent that nothing has really transpired yet. So Sam, in closing, and maybe we'll dive deeper into this in our next conversation with Jean Chrétien and Mark Carney, how long do you think it is before that empire turns its attention back northward? And what do you think comes out of that?
Yeah, I had really hoped that we wouldn't get to that point. As we've talked a number of times, I wanted to be fair to Mark Carney and say, if he's as smart as people say, he will realize that we're at that point where, as tough as Donald Trump is being and as impossible to negotiate it as he may be, it's an even worse option to go over to Beijing and even try to use them as leverage in a deal. That it's suicidal. And so I believe at this point, as I pointed towards, it's becoming more clear. It's not just me saying anymore that things like the Power Corporation of Montreal and their direct dealings with Jean Chrétien and Jean Chrétien's continuing and lengthy dealings with senior Chinese Communist Party business entities. Mm-hmm. How can we get away from that? These are Canadian prime ministers in direct dealings, along with their industrialist family in Montreal, with Chinese Communist senior intelligence and business entities, right? It can't fly. And so Canada, meaning most of the citizens, are now being, I'm going to speak a little bit more strongly because we're there. We are being held hostage by a business elite. It's not just Eastern Canada. The oil barons of the West have been involved in this pressure too, but mostly Eastern Canada is setting the policy for China and taking us in a suicidal direction that only benefits a mere, dozens, maybe hundreds of people in Canada. Some of the richest are going to benefit, but they won't benefit if U.S. Special Forces at some point start to target their Chinese friends in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto, or their Mexican friends in those cities. And that's the fire that these Canadian politicians, their lawyer friends, and their business friends are playing with right now. Because people could say that's being alarmist. I don't even think most reasonable people can see it now. But if we go kinetic in Taiwan, what's alarmist about that? Yeah. It'll be war, and the people that run the country will be in direct business dealings with the people that the U.S. government is trying to kill. It can't get any more simple than that. So you asked me where I really want to stay away from my crystal ball on that one, but we're at that danger.
Yeah, I mean, look, Sam, just to cap this off, what I'm seeing is the U.S. is not even putting all of its weight. I mean, they're just using special forces units in Venezuela, whatever they're using in Iran, whether or not they might be using something or not. Greenland, they're like, all right, you guys, Germany, you send out your rowboats. If you get in our way, we'll crush you. But Canada, on the other hand, is in far deeper with China than Maduro and Khomeini, than anybody in Greenland could ever even dream of. And I think they're saving us for the end because, number one, we're a lame duck. There's nothing we can do. I mean, we are not elbows up, we're belly up, right? And however, purging and stripping China out of our country, I think, is not going to be a surgical removal. It's going to be more blunt force trauma. Now, what does that mean for us as Canadian citizens? I don't know. But I think you and I are in a very strange place at a very strange time. And I think the coming months are going to be very interesting for us. But
yeah, I mean, we'll get into this more in 2026. I hope we don't get to that absolute endpoint. But look, in an ideal world, we would have a spring election. And I think there's a chance that a conservative government could renew Aaron O'Toole 2021 policy plank again, mm-hmm. and convince our friends in the United States that actually we can be salvaged. But barring an Aaron O'Toole 2021 mm-hmm. policy on China, which was reasonable, completely reasonable, and it was the only course of action to save this country.
Yeah.
No, there's no good outcomes to that. And Mark Carney, as we've said, I listened to our Christmas special more than once, and I want to credit you. I think it was a very good talk. And if people listen to that, and then they read what Michael Kovrig has been posting over the past weeks, the alignment is pure. This is pure intelligence, and we talked about it for a good 2 hours.
Dude, I listened back to it and I was just like, why was I even there? I should have just shut my mouth and let Sam talk for 2 hours. Not at all. But I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, look, man, a lot of what I know is because of you. Aside from being a friend, I'm a fan of your work, right? And it's what's interesting to me, and I've said this on a few other podcast episodes and on my live streams with Payman Ascari. One of the things I'm most proud of, man, is that I like to credit myself with being the one who kind of dragged you a little bit inch by inch further into the darkness, because
exploring the Marxist networks.
Well, the thing is we need you, right? Like, the people need you. And what's really refreshing is to see that you've, not even recently, but more and more you're willing to step out of the box. And the further you step outside of the box, I think that you having the analytical mind that you have, being a journalist, being in a position where you have to closely read and analyze the situations and scenarios in order to get them right, you're the guy, man. You're the guy to do it, right? And I'm just happy that I'm the alt-right Nazi podcaster guy that got to throw you into the darkness with me, right? Like, I'm the stuff that I'm seeing you reporting, Sam, is you're the best, dude. You're the best. And like, watching everybody else get it wrong. Like, the thing that drives me crazy is, how does Jeffrey Sachs have everything right, but is completely wrong on China? How does Glenn Greenwald, how do these award-winning journalists and, foreign affairs officials not see this or understand it? And if they can't see it, then it makes me question what their allegiances are.
Well, I'll leave you with this thought. As to Jeffrey Sachs or some of the people in his world, I mean, Dr. Charles Burton, a brilliant academic, former diplomat who was detained by the Ministry of State Security, he mentioned, I don't know if he said this live on a podcast or he just told me in an interview, but I don't think he'll mind me sharing it if it's the latter. He said he was offered payment to amplify the Chinese line. So if someone like Jeffrey Sachs, who's that smart, is getting it that wrong, it won't surprise me if they've got some goodies in Switzerland to help them come to those conclusions.
And on that note, Sam, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, go to thebureau.news and you'll read probably a good 5 to 6 good stories per week. And also at Scooper Cooper, but go to thebureau.news first and foremost.
Guys, I say this every time. Sign up at thebureau.news. I swear to God, every single day I'm glued to my email inbox because something new from Sam comes through. And if I'm somewhere where I can't get away, I will go hide in my car just to read it. Sam is on the cutting edge of this, guys. This guy has been just ripping story after story after story, op-eds, podcast episodes. He did a recent conversation. What's the Iranian journalist's name, Sam?
Nagar Mojtahedi, my former colleague at Global News. Yeah.
I only asked you that because there was no possible way I was ever going to be able to pronounce it. Guys, that episode on the Bureau is incredible. Sam, I'm just going to say this while we're still on the podcast together. I'm going to reach out to her and try to poach her for a conversation because it's just mind-blowing, right?
She is such a great, brave journalist. Awesome.
Yes.
I'm really proud to have worked with her.
But guys, don't just sign up at the Bureau for free. Sign up as a paid subscriber. Sam Cooper exists because he is completely reader funded. And if you want Sam to continue to burn the boats and to continue to follow me into the darkness, give him your subscription. Sign up as a paid subscriber. Get everything direct to your inbox. You don't have to rely on the algorithms. You get Sam's work right straight up every single morning in your inbox, and you could join me drinking your coffee and being freaked out. Also, follow Sam on X at Scooper Cooper. I am a habitual refresher of his feed. If you follow Sam, you will be too. Sam, I want to book you back in right away. We got to have this Chrétien Carney talk. I want to expand on this, on Canada's place in this story, because I'm not going to lie to you, man. I'm nervous, and I'm not nervous in a bad way. I'm nervous in a what is actually going to happen way, because I'm seeing everything that's happening and I know Canada's on the menu. Has to be.
Well, 2026 is going to be, it feels like it's going to be a shocking year. Absolutely.
All right, my brother. Well, we'll talk offline, but I'm bringing you back right away.
All right.